So as someone returning to Archeage, and as many of you may be as well, you'll be aware that obviously a heavy part of Archeage is the PvP. And there was a topic on the forum that came to my attention that actually highlighted a few things that I didn't know had actually changed since I'd left, and I don't really know exactly how I feel on some of those issues. I wanted to show you the post, I wanted to break it down for you, and obviously give you a link to have a little discussion on there if you want to as well. But let's get stuck in with the actual post itself. It was made by a guy called Zekanox. And his first point is that housing areas are now safe zones, even in conflict areas, although I am going to say here that that does not include when areas are at war. I'm just going to be talking about conflict areas for now. Before, if you were in a conflict area and you were in your housing area and you were inside your house, if the guy could see you and he had a ranged weapon, he could hit you through the window. When I was playing before, that kind of thing would happen to me. You could do it even on the pirate island as well, things like that. But, however, now it seems to be that the way that it works is even in the conflict areas before the war, it's safe. So even if you're inside and there's an enemy outside, they can't really do anything until you step out of that housing area. I'm just going to say very briefly that I don't know how I feel about that one. They are your enemy nation, you should be able to attack them. It does seem a bit weird that even in a conflict area you can't. Moving on to his second point, trader outposts in the surrounding areas as safe zones. That really confused me when I read it. For those that might be new to the game, essentially you can make packs on your faction island, you can then put it in a boat, transfer it to the enemy faction island for a very high risk, and then hand it in for a higher reward than on your own nation island. Before, even when you were handing them in, you could be attacked. It was a really risky maneuver. However, now it seems that the area around those trade-in, or traders should I say, is safe, which means it's a lot safer, a hell of a lot safer, to do that. And I completely agree with what is written there, because you're meant to be on enemy territory, why would it be safe? But that's really all I've got to say on that one. It's just a really strange change that they've made. However, point 3 says that most conflict areas now cycle automatically. The way that it used to work was PvP would happen in those conflict areas, and the more kills that happened in those areas would mean the conflict would go up and up and up and eventually go to war after a certain amount of PvP had occurred in that area. And what that used to mean was you couldn't just wait for peacetime, which comes after the war. You couldn't just wait for it to be a completely safe area to do any quests. You just had to risk it. Either that or be very patient and wait for peacetime, which could take hours. Now it's just time based. You can schedule when you're going to do your quests because PvP makes no real difference to it. I think that takes away some of the fun of the game, because I used to go around with groups of people, you'd find them all the time, going around looking for PvP in conflict areas to gain honor points and to push the conflict forward. Now it just seems like people can just sit back, wait, and then just do some quests. There's no real urgency for PvP or any incentive. Let me know how you feel on that particular point, because to be honest, I much prefer the older system. It felt more like there was user input actually put into the scaling up of war rather than just an automatic flag going up after a certain amount of time. Now on to his fourth point, and that is that Hulk fights are now a battleground and you have to join it via an instance. As many of you probably remember, it used to be a massive blob v blob in pretty much the town centre almost. It was really messy, but quite fun at the same time. If anyone knows why they took it instanced, please do put that in the comments, because I don't actually know why they've done it. In my opinion, in terms of MMOs, I think the less instances the better. Dungeons make sense, because otherwise it would just be an absolute horrendous mess. And for arenas, it kind of makes sense as well. But for large scale PvP and things like that, I feel like having it out in the open where people could spectate it and see it from a really long distance away was a lot more cool. And I hope they take it back to how it was before, because it was really, really fun to take part in that massive scale in the world PvP. The fifth part of his post was that Library was originally PvP free like Hasler, and essentially you could attack whoever wherever you wanted, but it got nerfed into a peace zone and you basically couldn't do anything to anyone. Which is a bit of a shame in my opinion, because it's a bit like Kraken, the way that you can contest the enemy faction from trying to gain good loot. You could go into Library and try and stop people from getting their items to level up what was Obsidian or, other kind of gears like that. If they don't want it to be an open PvP area, maybe make it like a conflict area where certain times of day it is at war and you can attack each other. That way people who want to farm in peace can do that, people who want to PvP can do that. Plus if you did decide to risk farming in there while there was PvP going on, it would mean that there were less mobs being killed, because most of the people who don't want PvP would be hiding. But I don't want to spend too long on that, so point 6 is that Diamond Shores has basically been made kind of into a peace zone. There are still obviously conflict areas, but the amount of peace zones and cannons around has been increased massively over the years. I do kind of get the guy's point, because since I last played, they've added even more, and it used to be that people would try and attack you while you were doing the quests for your little camp area on Diamond Shores, and now it's really hard to even attempt that because of the amount of cannons and safe zones. People will just run to near library or their side, and essentially you'll just get hit by a cannon, you can't go near them. Again, don't really want to spend too long on that point, it's pretty straightforward. I do think they should maybe step it back a little. Not much, but just make it a little bit of a step back so people can test the waters, and if people are happy with it there, leave it there. His 7th point, which again I'm not going to spend too much time on, was the removal of player factions. He basically says it's a good idea because most of the time when a faction was created, most of the really high geared people would just join that, and then it would basically be really low gear score versus really high gear score. Now number 8 is something I didn't quite believe was true. I had to read it a few times and sit back and go, really? They really thought that was a good idea? And they've essentially capped the amount of pirates there can be to 100, which means there's 100 pirates at any one time, offline or online. They could all be offline for all you know. And I've looked around to make sure this is, you know, not just this guy's opinion, but there are quite a few people who say it's basically impossible to get in. There's alts taking up spaces and people basically sell their slots, which is probably definitely the opposite of what Gamigo and XL would want. Now if they don't want to revert it to being crime points and then doing a quest line to become a pirate, then essentially I would just advise raising the cap, because with the release of Unchained there's going to be a ton of people who want to be pirates, and 100 per server is probably going to be way under the margin of what people are going to be wanting to do. But I'd say that's one of the main points I'd want to get a reply on. Even though I don't want to be a pirate, it shouldn't be limiting to what other people want to do. Now his next point I would like to get a little bit of clarification on. If anyone has played Pirate recently or in 6.0 in career or something to try it out, please do let me know. He's basically saying that due to the guards and the safe housing, which we covered before, you basically can't fight each other as pirates. Which is kind of, you know, you're a pirate, you attack whoever. But yeah, if that is as bad as he's saying, that isn't exactly great for pirates. Now we're nearly at the end now, don't worry, but his 10th point I'm not going to read out. I would just highly advise reading into the crime point changes. They essentially made it so attacking people gave you a lot of crime points, which obviously means the longer you will go to jail. And from what I've read into this, it just kind of makes it a huge mess in terms of GVGs or contesting things, or even just farming if someone tries to gank you, or just generally just PvP has become a little bit messy, especially if it's your own faction. And one of the suggestions in this thread that I've linked is actually really good, and I quite like the actual description of it, and it's essentially just lower the crime points right back to where they were, or even slightly below, and make it so that each time you kill the same person, the amount of crime points you will gain is doubled. So that way you can't just troll people indefinitely, because it will go up to a really high amount of crime points just for a kill later on. Now obviously Gamigo could go with something completely different, and obviously if they've got something better, go for it. I'm not saying to have to go for that, but it seems pretty good and it punishes trolls, so, you know, why not? Now his last point I'm a bit 50-50 on, and that is the fact that you can basically have a peace treaty as a guild, which means no other guild can do a GVG. And basically, as long as they keep paying for that peace treaty, they can never ever be attacked. Which means people who want to be traders, who do, you know, long trade runs constantly as a guild, will never ever be able to be attacked, which it shouldn't be that easy. And granted, if you want to be in the economy, that's completely up to you. If you don't want to do fights, that's fine. But people should at least at some point have the opportunity to have a fight for that loot, essentially. Now the counter argument to that is you could always purple up and attack them, but then you would gain crime points, and then if you get put into jail if you die, you have then basically wasted your time completely. Whereas the GVG system was basically, if you decided you wanted to take their loot and you knew where they were going and you had a spy watching them, you could then attack them and take the loot. And due to the fact that you were in the middle of a GVG, there would be no crime points because it was a, you know, a legal fight, so to speak. I kinda get why there's a peace treaty system, but I think it is basically abusable if you just want to do trades and stuff like that. You'll never ever lose anything as long as you keep paying for it. Similar to the last suggestion, my suggestion for this would be that if they want to extend the peace treaty indefinitely, it should cost more each time, and therefore at some point they will have to take a break. It's impossible not to. Plus, if they wanted to make sure that that wasn't being abused as well, make it so that it takes time for the cost to actually reduce itself back to the original rate. That way you would have to take a considerable amount of time, maybe a few days or something, to actually reduce it back to the base rate. Because even when I used to play back in 2016, I remember people would use the peace treaty thing indefinitely, and it would be really hard to actually find any guild other than like 1 or 2 PvP guilds that actually wanted to do a GVG. But anyway, that's basically all there is for this video. I'm sorry it took so long. Usually my videos are a lot shorter than this. But there was quite a lot to get through, and I hope this has opened your eyes if you're a returning player to some of the changes that have happened, and if you're a new player as well. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if anything is outdated or I've got anything wrong, please do send me a message or a comment and I will pin it, because I'm not trying to misinform anyone. I'm not trying to, spread hate or anything like that. I just want it to be factual. Anything that can improve the PvP in Archeage is a benefit to both me and anybody who wants to do PvP. But anyway, that's the end of this video, and I hope to see you here for the next one.